as I mentioned recently, we've had nothing but a feast of sport. We're just over the World Cup and Spain won, as you all know. How many of you know that Limerick won the hurling all-final last Sunday? And today Mayo plays Galway in the football All-Ireland. Kerry, who said Kerry? Who said Kerry? Oh, Alan, you said Kerry. You get the prize. That was said intent as a prize. And I got it wrong last week. I said Mayo were. But Limerick definitely won the hurling. Yeah. And I like Limerick. Who are you up for, Kerry or Mayo? Kerry. No, I think Mayo. Kerry have won it too often. And also we're at the beginning of the Commonwealth Games. It's never ending, all the wonderful sport. And we had Wimbledon. It's just unbelievable. So much sport, which I've indulged in a lot of it. And of course, when you think of sport, what do you think of? Shoes, don't you? No. Because you look at the footwear of all the sports people, and they're in multiple colours, all sorts of colours. And particularly, if I said Adidas, everyone would know what I'm talking about. Well, Adidas was founded by A.D. Dassler, otherwise known as Adolf Dassler, but he preferred to be called just A.D. And he started making shoes in his mother's laundry room, I think around in the 30s. Now I asked myself immediately, who has a laundry room? But his mother did, and that's where he made his shoes. And he called it Gebruder Dassler Shoe Fabric, which is German for Dassler Brothers Shoe Factory. And that was in 1924. He set that up with his Bruder brother. But however, after the Second World War, they split up. A.D. stayed making Adidas, and his brother went off and made Puma, another famous brand, Puma shoes. And then, of course, nowadays, if you say to somebody, Nike, they will not say to you, which they should, oh yes, Nike, of course, the Greek goddess of victory. They don't. They say shoes, sports shoes, because that's another famous brand. And then you have Clark's. I don't think there was a Clark, there was a goddess of running or anything in ancient English pagan religions. Clark's was set up by Cyrus Clark in Street in Somerset in 1825. That's as much as said about poor Cyrus and Clark's. But it brought me on to another thing when I thought of all this. And particularly because we're in a church. Sandals. Jesus' sandals. Now, sandals are often referred to in the Bible, and sometimes people call the sandals that would have been worn by Jesus as Jerusalem sandals, which were made from minimalist leather and quite beautiful thing. But I'm sure you've all been asking yourself for years, what happened to his sandals? Jesus' sandals. Where did they go? We learn in the Gospels that the soldiers played dice for his garments, but his sandals would have been quite significant as well. They would have been beautifully made. And yet, we don't hear what happened to his sandals. And I'm now going to reveal to you, with bated breath, what happened to Jesus' sandals. Well, it would appear that they have been preserved as a holy relic. They are allegedly housed in the Basilica of the Transfiguration of our Lord. And the relic consists of the remains of the ornate fabric shoe that was donated to the abbey by the Frankish king Pippin the Short in 762 AD. Pippin is said to have received them directly from Rome as a gift from Pope Stephen II. Now I have to add, there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the sandals ever belonged to Jesus. But that's the story, and that's whether they are. There's neither historical nor archaeological evidence, but it would appear that the provenance of them is that they were handed to Pippin the Shore by Stephen II. Now, it has said, though, that if you put these sandals on, you can walk on water. Sorry, I just made that bit up. And I shouldn't have really, it was very inappropriate. So who was Pippin the Short? Was he short? Because he was called Pippin the Short because he was the younger brother of another Frankish king. Later he became known, which kind of clarified who he was. Rather than Pippin the Short, he was known as Pippin the Younger, Pippin der Ungar. Now, that's why, the real reason why I read Exodus 3:5 earlier on. God tells Moses from the burning bush to remove his sandals because he's standing in a sacred space. I really wanted to find somewhere in the Bible where sandals are mentioned, and that was a very appropriate place. Of course, there's another story there that the reason God spoke from the bush to Moses was to indicate to Moses that this was the burning bush, which has become the symbol of Presbyterianism, and that the place was sacred. So therefore he should take off his shoes because he was now in a sacred space, which we don't do nowadays. The only people, the only faith to my knowledge, that take their shoes off, their footwear off, are Muslims, remove footwear, but that is more out of respect and also a very practical reason. Muslims remove their footwear going into the mosque because they don't want to come in contact with dirt from the streets. Because when a Muslim is praying, their forehead, their nose, and their hands touch the grounds or the floor of the mosque, so they don't want dirt from the street carried in on their shoes. So that's a very, very practical reason. I remember, I think Isabella remembers as well, there was a lovely little sandal shop in a Cretan village called Vrises, where they sold the most beautiful and simple sandals. We used to always call them Jesus sandals, not because of their style or anything, but the man that was selling them looked like Jesus. When I say looked like Jesus, he looked like what I saw in the movies as Jesus, but he really did. If you were going to cast someone as Jesus, this was the man in the village of Vrises in Crete. Now, what's interesting about the sandals is the obvious thing. They became a relic, and they became sacred in this abbey. And people made pilgrimage to look at them, believing them to be the sandals of Jesus Christ. And relics are an incredibly important thing in the Christian faith. Well, the Christian faith and Buddhism, where people cherish and treat relics as sacred things. They serve as a purpose, as a physical connection to holy figures. I think I mentioned last week when I was in Canterbury, we visited St. Thomas's Catholic Church, where there's a relic from Oscar Romero, Bishop Oscar Romero, who was murdered in San Salvador, his stole. And there's a relic of Thomas à Becket, who was a martyr, Catholic martyr, who was murdered in Canterbury Cathedral. So people do visit these and they pray at them, and they're very important in people's lives. One of the most impressive relics I read about was a church that possessed the pen with which Pius IV signed the dogma declaring the Immaculate Conception of Our Lady. So the pen where he signed this dogma, is cherished in this church and treated as a significant relic, and particularly because the document was declaring the Immaculate Conception. And when you think of relics, and when you think of visiting places where there may be relics of certain saints, and it also exists, by the way, before we think, oh yeah, that's a religious thing, we think of sacred places and sacred relics. The people that visit the home of Elvis Presley in their thousands, and visit graves, the grave of Oscar Wilde in Père Lachaise in Paris, and all sorts of places where people go to look at things in the secular world that may have belonged to somebody famous, maybe like John Lennon. You go to look at Dakota buildings in New York, where John Lennon lived. I've done it, and I felt it was a sort of a pilgrimage to the memory of John Lennon. But then in other ways, we hold on to the possessions of those who have departed us. I see a similarity, and maybe not everybody would, but I see a similarity with religious relics and how we possess things that were owned by a deceased member of our family. It might be a watch, photos, even a religious item, maybe a prayer book that they had, or a Bible that they owned. And of course, items of clothing that we cherish will have no practical use, but we hold on to them as something sacred of that person that we knew. So it's not that different, in my opinion, from the relics of saints. I would love a psychologist to explain to me why we do those things, because they are so powerful. Maybe people take a lock of hair, and they will even wear it in a brooch. Whatever it can be, it connects us with the memory, or maybe not just the memory of that person. We have to be careful in our secular world that we try to diminish the meaning of things. I think it's more than just connection. I mean, people feel it's comfort, it's helping them with grief, but it's more than a connection. They feel a sense of the presence of that person through the relic. No different than when you go as a person of faith and pray to a relic of a saint, or indeed Jesus' sandals. So we think of all these greats, all these great people. I remember loads of my friends who were members of the Irish Communist Party, and they'd go to Moscow to look at Lenin's tomb, and then they'd tell me, oh no, we don't believe in that story. And they'd queue for hours to go in and look at the remains of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. So it all embraces the same concept. They were going to look at somebody who was sacred to their beliefs. So like with the relics and the remains of all the greats and the holy ones, and all their relics and all their memorabilia held in great esteem and adoration. Yet as we as ordinary folk, just we as ordinary people, pick up a book and we look at that book and say, I'll never throw this book out. That's what he or she loved. That was their favorite poetry book. It's sacred. I will hold on to this and I will bequeath it to somebody else. Listen to a piece of music. Who cannot listen to music? I mean, we are so blessed here with the music we've got in this church, because it creates so many memories. It brings back so many things. Because a piece of music can become, in my opinion, it is only my opinion, a sense of like a relic. That piece of music reminds us of a time, of a place. I think that's partially why I read Yeats' Isle of Innisfree. That's what he was thinking of things. It might have been stones, it might have been the lake, it was whatever it was. It was bringing back so many memories too. We gaze at a picture. Who has never gazed at a picture and shed a tear? When that picture just flooded you with memories and senses that you had thought you no longer had, that you'd forgotten were even still existed within you. And that picture, you will never throw it out. It is now sacred. And they are precious to us. And they are sacred and holy in their own unique way, just as much as Oscar Romero's stole or Jesus' sandals. They are treasured, and they are treasured because they're ours and they connect us with the person we have lost. And they are our memories. And they are, in my opinion, not everybody would agree with me, they are blessed and cherished in all their forms and all their sounds. Amen.